Hello everyone, this is Venom, and we are here with some Monster Hunter Wilds. Now this is going to be the start of my tips and tricks series for newer players and for vets. I am getting started on this very late. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of, well, not unfortunately, I've had a lot of really good real life stuff going on here recently, just family stuff, so nothing bad, just haven't had a whole lot of time to make videos, but we are here with the Monster Hunter Wilds. Okay, so first off, if you are new to the game, the very first thing you're going to want to do is choose your weapon. Now, it can be daunting even for people who have played the game in the past and are returning, or just wanting to choose a new weapon. It can be kind of daunting to figure out which one to use. Now, this is going to be tailored more towards people who have never played the game at all before, or who are still brand new to the game, whether it be to the series or to this game in particular. I'm going to talk about all 14 weapons a little bit. I can't talk about all of them in super detail, but I'm going to give you an idea of how they play, and if I recommend them or not, and how hard or how easy they're going to be. And even after hearing all this, you still don't know what you should choose. I'm going to let you know right now, my recommendation is going to be the Lance. For those vets watching this, know that's not a joke. There is kind of a running gag that Lance is like the least used weapon in the game. It's not quite true. It's about moderately used now, but it is kind of the joke, just a defensive weapon. You don't do a lot of damage. On the surface, that is true. You're definitely going to survive your hunts a lot more. Damage is going to be a little bit lower than the rest, but there is a certain move and a certain level that once you get to it, you no longer are just, super defensive. The Lance is actually an extremely offensive weapon, but unless you've actually, played with the weapon a lot and gotten used to it, and learn the secret behind it, then yeah, you just probably think that it's a defensive weapon. But again, Lance mains know this, people who play with it know this, but that would be my recommendation if you could not figure out what weapon to choose off this list. I'm going to talk about the others as well and kind of give my take on them. I am a Charge Blade main and a Lance secondary, but I've also gotten proficient with the Longsword and working on Sword and Shield, but like I said, I've used everything. Let's start things off with the Greatsword. Now, the Greatsword is the weapon that you kind of start off with after the initial cutscene of the game. Now, for those who are wondering, you don't got to worry about unlocking other weapons. You start with all of them. They just happen to give you the Greatsword in the cutscene. But before you do your first fight, you can choose any of the weapons. You start off with a base of every one of those. The Greatsword, a very slow-moving weapon. It can be a little bit faster once you get to the more advanced things like shoulder charging. It's a weapon that really hits hard. In fact, I believe it's the hardest hitting weapon in the game. Now, because of how slow it is, though, you do kind of have to time your swings. It does help to know the monster. You can take some risky swings, but it takes a while to get into these charge states sometimes, especially if you're newer and you don't know how to do things like shoulder charge. And if you get knocked out of that, it could mean, having to go through all that again to get to your things like your true charge slash. More advanced players can get to that thing or those kind of things much easier, and they can make use of things like shoulder charge and keep their combos going. But beginners is going to be a little bit harder to do. It can block, so you can block in case of emergency. It's not a bad weapon to start with. Personally, I probably wouldn't start with it. I'd probably start with something like the Longsword, but yeah, Greatsword is not a bad choice. It's a very popular weapon. Next up, the Longsword. Does not have the ability to block, but it is much faster to move around with this than the Greatsword. Like I said, you can't block with it, but it is very strong. It's a very good DPS weapon. It's typically one of the highest in the game. It's also got a counter slash you can do, so if you get good with it and you can time it right, you can actually do a counter slash against your enemies. So you don't got the block, but if you got enough skill, you're not going to get hit anyway. It's got some very fun moves. It's got some counters to the weapon. It's got some charges or some gauges you can charge up to unleash some special moves, and it's got I'm not going to spoil it right now, but it's got a very fun, well, actually, there it is. In the bottom left corner, you can see the Helmbreaker, and it's got the follow-up. It's a very fun sword to use. People kind of call it the weave weapon. It's a good weapon. I'm not hating on it at all, but your teammates might, because it does trip up your teammates quite a bit, and it can be a pain for newer players who don't know to put flinch free on. So I guess pro tip, if you're playing with other people and they've got a longsword, or you think you might be playing with people, put on a flinch free jewel, the brace jewel. That way the longsword doesn't trip you up. So that's a fun tip for you right there. Sword and Shield is a very fun weapon. It's a lot more advanced than I initially gave it credit for, although the last time I was really using it was definitely in the early game, early days of Monster Hunter, like 15 some years ago, 20 years ago, damn near when I started playing. It does have a shield. It does not block nearly as much as the other weapons do, but it does block some, so it's nice. It's a very fast weapon. You can see here just how fast it is in the bottom left-hand corner. It's got some really brutal combos as well, too. It can do a lot. It used to be kind of the support weapon because you could use items with it at the same time. It's not really so much of a necessity anymore. It no longer has a coding system either, but it's got some brutal combos. You wouldn't think something like that does, but it's almost like you're actually playing like Link or something. It's really cool to use. It can stun enemies because of the shield. It can do a shield bash. It can just let loose with a torrent of sword swipes and shield bashes, and it does some pretty cool damage. So downsides is, like I said, if you're gonna want to use a shield a lot, you're definitely gonna have to invest in guard up. But the shield is really not gonna do much good. It'll probably keep you alive in an emergency. I'd say it's probably a safer version of using the dual blades, that I'll talk about next. It's not going to put out as much damage as fast as them, but you still kind of got that oh shit button if things go wrong. And the sword and shield is a very fun, strong weapon too. It's got combos. Don't sleep on it. There are some pretty cool sword and shield mains out there. So all three of you guys keep it up. I'm kidding. It's a very it's pretty popular weapon. Dual blades. These are pretty much a ninja weapon. This is another weapon that cannot block, but it's going to have its own gauge it can build up to unleash different abilities and different combinations. Build up your charge and then let loose on the enemy. It does a lot of damage. I mean, you're putting out a ton of damage very, very quickly. It's the fastest weapon in the game. Melee weapon in the game. It is very, very fun. It just looks beautiful to use, and I have played with them quite a bit. It was one of the other weapons I used to use when I first started playing. Very fun. It's just gotten more and more fun over the years. And like I said, this is another one where you're not going to be able to block, so this is going to be one you're gonna really need to dodge, and especially when you don't know a monster, you're really going to need to keep yourself out of harm's way. Dodge, make sure you're paying attention, and if you can do that, it's a very, very fun weapon, and you will easily be one of the highest damaging people on the battlefield using this. Next up, we got hammers. Now, hammers are kind of like the child between the greatsword and the longsword. Hammers actually let you move around very quickly, but they cannot block. They do a lot of damage, and I mean just a crap ton, and they do it very quickly. Now, because of the type of weapon they are, they don't do slashing damage. They do impact damage, but they do a lot of it. You're going to be knocking over the monsters a lot with these. Hammers are also pretty good at doing a lot of aerial damage. They actually are pretty good at doing things like mounting. Actually, okay, that looked like the blade from, what's that blade? From Seven Deadly Sins, Escanor's blade. I can't remember what it is, but it reminded me of that. But off topic. Hammer is definitely one of the weapons. All the weapons are DPS weapons in the game. I know it's weird for me to say that something's a DPS weapon, but I should say this is just a high damaging weapon. A lot of damage very quickly, a lot of knockdowns. It's a very, very brutal weapon. Very, very fun. It's got some pretty cool attacks. But again, this is not one you're going to be able to block with. I'd say as a newer player, you would probably be able to do worse than this. It's not bad to use, although I do prefer that newer players be able to block. Learning how to dodge is a bit of a pain in the game. You definitely got to get used to it, but if you don't want to, like I said, hammer is a way to go. Next up, let's talk about the hunting horn. The hunting horn is the hammer with soul. It is another blunt weapon, but each hunting horn is essentially, and basically it's a buffing weapon. It lets you buff your teammates and yourself. Different hunting horns can do different things. You do kind of have to learn how to play each horn and how to play each tune. It's been a while since I touched hunting horn, but everything's got its own combination. Everything's got its own rhythm. As far as damage goes, it still does crazy damage. I mean, I remember the first time I saw a hunting horn, like a real hunting horn main, use it, and holy crap. I mean, you may as well just be using a regular hammer. And he was weaving all the songs in between the combos. It was crazy. But hammer is widely considered to be the support weapon of the game, again, because you're able to buff yourself and your teammates. A lot of people like to argue, oh, it's not a support weapon, it's not a support weapon, it's damage weapon, it can do this. It's a support weapon, but because it's a support weapon, people like to think it can't do damage. It is a support weapon, but it is also able to do a lot of damage. You may wonder why everybody doesn't use their hunting horn. Now that we can use two weapons, which we could not do in the past. A lot of people are using like a hunting horn secondary and using their main weapon as their main, but I don't do that. But I do see a lot of people that are hunting horn mains, and I give respect to them. I may learn it at some point. I just didn't get into it before, but they are very, very sought after on the battlefield. If you're a hunting horn main, then you're just going to be loved in every team if you're good. Definitely not one I would pick up at first, but if you're able to master this, you have to go through, each horn's got its own melodies that do different things. Like here on the right side, you can see I've got, what's this one? This is the Folger Howl Gardenia. It's got the Echo Bubble, which increases your evasion movement speed. This one is stamina regeneration. This one's got health regeneration. I mean, you can heal your teammates here too. So yeah, Hunting Horn, if you can master this, you will be very, very loved on the battlefield. If you can. Even if you can't, you can still do good damage, but you will be very loved by everybody. The Lance is on the surface, and this is what has traditionally been a defensive weapon. It's got the highest base guard in the game, along with the Gun Lance. It's got very few combos. It's a very guard and poke type weapon. You can put out your shield and poke and actually do a little guard poke. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does keep you safe. It's got some just basic thrusting combinations. It has got a couple new combos in Monster Hunter Wilds here. But overall, as far as gameplay goes, it's not really flashy. It doesn't have a lot of the combinations. It doesn't have like the damage gauges and all the flash. A lot of the other things do, but it does have defense. So on the surface, it's a very good weapon to start with as far as keeping yourself alive and figuring out the rhythm of monsters. But once you've got to the point to where you can safely get through a hunt, and you master the basics, because there's only a couple of combos. You also don't roll, you kind of dodge back and forth, but it's still pretty good. But there's only a couple of combos to master, and once you've got them down, you know how to use them, and you're able to maneuver around with the weapon, you've got one of two choices at that point. You can either A, switch your different weapon now that you've gotten used to the game, which there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to use the Lance. But if you want to stick with the Lance, you're going to notice that with the addition of a couple of moves, one in particular, that the Lance actually goes from a defensive powerhouse to both an offensive and defensive powerhouse. And that move is the counter. The Lance can actually put up its shield in a counter position, and when a monster hits it, you will immediately go right into your next jab. So you can essentially shrug off a monster's attack and keep attacking him. So as long as you hit the combo at the right time, you can keep attacking, shake off a massive attack from an enemy, and then keep going right back into it. The combinations may be simple, but you're very easily able to shrug off damage that other big DPS weapons would have to roll out of the way typically, because a lot of the big ones don't have blocks, or they would have to block, or they would have to reposition around the monster, and they're very slow. Instead, the Lance can just shrug that off and keep going into the combo he's already doing. Now, it can be hard to hit focus spots with the Lance because you're hitting it with the shield, but I'm telling you right now, I actually, and those of you who have watched my channel a bit or did the poll, I actually will know this. I put out a poll a while ago, and I was like, hey, what weapon should I learn as my secondary for Monster Hunter Wilds? And I put out a poll, and one of the options was, should I learn the Lance or the Gun Lance? And I only gave the poll a few days. People did answer it more later on, but I gave it a couple of days, and by the end of the couple of days, people said, you know, Lance or Gun Lance. Only a couple people voted. I think only one person voted at a time, and I was like, screw it. He voted, and that's what won. So I decided to figure out what did I want to use between the Lance and the Gun Lance. And while I'm talking about this, I'm going to go and show up the next weapon too. That's going to be the Gun Lance. This will be weapon number 8.
What are we making today?
And I thought about the Gun Lance at first. The Gun Lance is basically the Lance with a gun on the end of it. Now, the moves are a bit different. It doesn't fight the way you think it would. While the Lance does a lot of poking, the Gun Lance actually does a lot of slashing, but it also works in explosive shells to its combinations, like a gun on the end of it. Like think the sword gun from like Final Fantasy, or gun sword from Final Fantasy 8, I think, or 9, and I think it's 8. And think of that, but on a Lance instead. There are different shell types that do different damage patterns. There's a very, very good guard on these because these also have the highest guard in the game along with the Lance, and it's a totally different playstyle. It's a technical playstyle. There are actual gauges you got to figure out. You got to watch your ammunition. You got to reload. There's a lot more into it than just the stick and poke that the Lance had. Well, I already mained the Charge Blade, which I'll talk about here in a minute, which is considered the most technical weapon in the game. And I was like, you know what? Let's go with something simple. And the thing that actually sealed it was that I knew that the lance had a counterattack, and I was kind of interested in learning that. Now, had the gun lance had a counterattack, I would be a gun lance secondary right now, more than likely, because I really like that weapon. I like the idea of learning it, but I ended up using the lance, and yeah, the lance is great for beginners, but if you decide to push through and master, I mean, I got my lance on right now. So if you decide to push through and master it, you're going to use that counter, and it's going to allow you to do some amazing things damage-wise. Next up, let's talk about the Switch Axe. The Switch Axe is another technical weapon. It allows you to go between sword and shield mode. Now, if I'm not mistaken, and keep in mind it's been a while since I used this one, you are typically going to use the axe mode, which is the slower mode. That's going to allow you to build up this is a beautiful looking weapon. Hold on a second. Sorry, I was looking at the Guardian Rathalos here, Flame Splitter. This thing looks amazing. Well, I'm at the I might make that anyway. But you basically build up sword gauge in axe mode, which is a slow but heavy moving attack. It's even got an infinite swing to it. So technically, if you were to drink like an energy drink and you had infinite stamina, I mean, I've seen in the past some speed runs that involved the Switch Axe and just going into that mode and just destroying a monster. Now, that in itself was already pretty strong, but when your gauge is full, you can actually switch into sword mode. Now, I want you to imagine greatsword without the ability to block, but with the speed of a longsword. So a greatsword, but at longsword speed. That's exactly what the Switch Axe will turn into. Now, this is another weapon that cannot block, but it's another one that's considered a very high damaging weapon. It is a technical one. It's not quite my playstyle, but it's close. I like it a lot. Like I said, I typically like weapons that are technical, but that can block too. And if it's got something that can counter, I like it a lot even more. So I've just been staring at that one switch. It looks so good. Let me show you a few more. But yeah, it's a very fun weapon. Switch Axes can do quite a bit of damage. I know a few people who have mained them before, and it may be one that you might like to do. Now, this is not one I would say is one I would recommend for beginners. I'd say probably wait till you got a bit more experience with the game. Again, you can use whatever you want to. Ooh, that looks like okay. See, now I might have to go and make this just because I love scythe weapons, and that's a damn scythe. You know what? I'm not going to make that work. I can make that work. But I don't recommend this as a starting weapon. But like I said, you can use whatever you want, but I would probably wait till you got a bit more experience to use the Switch Axe. Insect Glaive is one that, quite personally, you either like it or you don't. Now, personally, I don't like the Insect Glaive. I'm sorry, I know sacrilege, I know it's a fun weapon, but I just don't like it. The Insect Glaive actually has two parts. It's got the glaive itself, and it's got the kinsect. It's like an insect that sits on your arm, and is actually a part of the weapon. It can actually do things for you, and support you while you're fighting. Now, what happens is, what you're supposed to do is you can send your kinsect out, and basically shoot it at different parts of the monster you're hunting, and it basically grabs extracts for you. And depending on where you grab the extract from on the monster, you're going to get different buffs, and then if you get all the color buffs, you can do so many crazy combos, and it's a very technical weapon. It's got a lot of moving parts to it, but I personally did not like it. I didn't like the kinsect portion of it. I hated trying to aim for different parts of the monster when I just wanted to fight the thing. For me, it just wasn't it. But for a lot of other people, oh, this is a fun weapon. Now, the fun part is not with the kinsect, it's with the actual weapon itself. Now, this thing is basically a helicopter. I don't know how else to explain it. The Insect Glaive is a helicopter. It's basically a staff. You're going to be doing a lot of jumping around, a lot of flying in the air, a lot of bouncing around in midair. It's really fun to watch and really fun to use. Like I said, I just didn't like the kinsect part of it. But it is a very, very much loved weapon. Now, they had taken one of the midair bounces away for Monster Hunter Wilds. The community basically went into an uproar, and it is back in the game, from what I understand. So that gives you an idea how fun people consider this weapon. And again, it is a very fun weapon. Now, this is typically considered the king of mounting weapons because of the fact that you can get in the air on your own. You don't need like a ledge or a hill or anything. There's only a few weapons that can do that. In fact, the only two that I can think of off the top of my head are the Insect Glaive, the Lance. I forgot. I don't think the Hammer's got one. I think they have a ledge ability. So yeah, I think the only two that can just get off the ground by themselves and mount, yeah, just those two. The Insect Glaive. If I'm mistaken, let me know down in the comments. But I think it's just the Insect Glaive and the Lance. But Insect Glaive is one that I do know people find quite fun. For me, it's just not my play style. But I do know people do like to mess around with it. You can also mix and match your Kinsects too. So each insect glaive comes with its own its own kinsect, you know, the insect that comes with it. But you don't have to just stick to that one. You can actually customize them and mix and match them and kind of raise them up. So it's kind of cool. It's almost kind of like a Pokemon-esque part to it. But either way, again, not one I would recommend. This is probably the weapon I would recommend the least for new players to use, if I'm being completely honest with you. I would say I would recommend people use the hunting horn before trying to use this one. That's how, and again, that's just me. It might be easier for other people. Maybe it's just the way my brain works, but that's just how I go. Now, you go in, take a look, try it. If you like it, like I said, go ahead and use it. But this is just the one that for me just doesn't work. It was really awkward for me. It can't block, but I do know it is capable of putting out some amazing damage. Alright, this one here is my bread and butter, my main. This is the Charge Blade. The Charge Blade is essentially a sword and shield if a mad scientist got a hold of it. The way it works is you have, in your sword and shield mode, you're going to basically use your sword to damage the monster. You're not going to do a ton of damage at first, but you're basically going to be charging up your sword. You're going to use that charge energy, and you're going to put it into your shield, and it's going to go into files. It's basically going to charge up those files, and you can then use those files to do different things. You can do everything but power up your shield's block to make it more powerful. You can charge up your sword to give it an elemental or a power-up boost. You can switch modes to the axe mode, and depending on whether or not you've hit a weak spot on a monster or not, you may also be in Savage Axe mode, which is just basically a hulking axe. It's actually the shield itself that you transform into an axe, and you basically just start wailing on a monster. It's a very fun weapon, but it is definitely probably the hardest one to learn. No, I should say the most technical on the list. I know a lot of people are daunted by trying to use a Charge Blade. I've seen quite a few people say they didn't want to use it. It seemed too complicated. I don't want to be thinking about, 18 different gauges while I'm playing. I've seen those same people say screw it and went in and tried it. Once you learn it, and it is not as hard as people really think it is, once you learn it, it is an extremely fun weapon, and I highly recommend trying it at some point if you have not. This weapon's capable of doing quite a bit. I cannot talk tonight. When it's in Savage Axe mode, which unfortunately in Monster Hunter Wilds, the only way to put it in Savage Axe mode is to hit a weak spot with Focus mode. I don't like that because that basically means that the Charge Blade is always going to be in contest with everybody to unlock a function of its weapon. It's not just doing more damage. To actually do something the weapon's capable of, or is supposed to be doing, you have to compete with that. I don't like that, but it does a ton of damage. You're basically swinging around a spinning meat grinder of a shield. I love it. It's my main weapon. Granted, I've actually used the lance more in Monster Hunter Wilds, but yeah, it's my main weapon. That's my go-to. I absolutely love it. So yeah, this is probably, if I'm being honest, the Charge Blade is the hardest weapon for beginners to learn around here. My bias is Insect Glaive, but if I'm being 100% honest, Charge Blade is probably going to be the least beginner-friendly. Now, if you've gotten good at, or if you're really ballsy, you can go ahead and try and learn this one first. I really wouldn't recommend it. I really don't. Now, like I said, I absolutely love it. It's my main. I can't think of using any other weapon as a main except maybe the lance. But, yeah, once you can learn this bad boy, it is really fun. I do not recommend for new players to use it, though. That's just, even though I love the weapon, I cannot recommend you to do it. Now, we're down to our 3 range weapons. We've got the bow, and then we've got the light bow gun and the heavy bow gun. I'll talk about the light bow gun and the heavy bow gun together because they're kind of the one and the same. They just kind of have different ways they do it. I'll talk about the bow first. The bow is not a long-range weapon. It is a mid-range weapon. You don't got to worry about making arrows. You're going to have infinite arrows, but you're going to have things called coatings that you're going to be using to coat your arrows. It's not really, you don't have like a damage gauge or something you got to worry about. Mainly it's going to be your coatings. You're going to be able to do a lot of things with the weapon. They got a lot of different coatings for these. You got things like power up, you got sleep, you got poison, you got basically all the basics on top of the element you've already got on your weapon. Now, the bow is a very mobile weapon. It's a mid-range weapon. It's very mobile. It's got a lot of combos that are going to involve a lot of not just hitting the same button, or I wouldn't say hitting the same button, but a lot of combos are going to involve sliding around quite a bit. So be ready for that one. A lot of dodging and then attacking. So if you don't like doing like a lot of dodging and attacking, if you don't like doing a lot of moving, I would not recommend the bow. But for those who don't mind it, I mean, the bow is... When I see people play this one, typically if I see a good bow player, it looks like one of those... It looks... I say like Legolas in Lord of the Rings, but not quite that. But it does look like somebody who's actively in a fight with a bow. It looks probably like the more realistic weapons in Monster Hunter. Granted, the bow and the arrows are just ginormous, but it's just really fun for me to watch somebody use a bow in this one. So it does pretty good damage. It's, again, I think this one was actually damn near broken in the beta. I mean, it was doing a ton of damage. Now, I think they fixed it. It's not doing quite as much anymore, but it's still a very strong, very fun weapon. It is a good weapon if you want to start getting used to doing stuff if you want to start getting used to ranged weapon, if you want to use one of the bow guns, the bow's not a bad place to start. Now, there is going to be quite a bit of management as far as things like coatings and making sure you got all those with you, along with the rest of your items, but it's not nearly as much stuff you got to worry about with the bow gun. So, now the light bow gun and the heavy bow gun I'm going to talk about together. Now, these are long-range weapons. Now, I say long-range, but long-range in Monster Hunter is not that long-range. These are essentially guns. Now, you're able to go through and you can actually adjust a lot of the things on them. They are very, very customizable weapons. You can choose what kind. You can do things that you couldn't do before. You can choose, like, the kind of ammo you want them to use. You can choose the special ammo that you want them to have. Now, you could do things like change the scopes on them in other games. Right now, you can just choose between the magazines right here. You can choose between the different magazines of this one. I haven't done too much with the bow guns in here, but typically the way they work are the heavy bow guns are going to do a lot more other bigger damage, and then the light bow guns are going to give you more like the statuses and the elemental damage. So if you want just flat damage, things like a lot of spread damage, which is one of the ammo types. You got spread, you got pierce, you got normal, you got explosive. If you want to do like a lot of just flat raw damage, a lot of explosives, you know, just like big boom, 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 the heavy bow gun is going to be for you. If you want to have a lot of the elemental attacks, if you want to have a lot more of the things like poison, the status stuff, that's going to be a light bow gun. Now, past that, that's really going to be the biggest difference between the two, besides the speed. The light bow gun, when you got it out, it's going to be a very fast walk, or it's going to be a run. But the heavy bow gun, of course, is going to be heavy. You're going to be walking around with it. And obviously, you cannot block with the light bow gun. The heavy bow gun could, in past games, equip itself with a shield on the front. I don't think they can do that now. Let me double check just in case, because I haven't... There might be something later on. I'll double check later on. I have not used the heavy bow gun right now, so unfortunately I don't know the specifications of that one part of it, but you could in the past. Either way, they are fun weapons if you don't want to get too up close to the monster, if you don't want to have to worry about things in melee range. They are good options, but you're going to have to manage a lot more things such as ammunition, so you're probably going to have to do a lot more gathering than hunters that are doing melee are, so keep that one in mind. Now, after all that's being said, that was all 14 weapons, and like I said at the beginning, if I had to choose a weapon for a new player to use, I would definitely choose the Lance. The Lance has got the highest defense, it's got the easiest combinations, and it's the weapon that, if you decide to stick with it, transforms from a very defensive weapon where you're just doing a lot of blocking and poking into something that is absolutely insane. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to show you guys a video of me just doing a hunt with the Lance and just absolutely dominating a monster. I don't even know what it is yet, but I'm going to film it next. I don't even know what monster I'm going to fight. I'm going to choose at random, and I'm going to show you guys what the Lance is capable of at the higher rank. So I'm HR rank 81 right now. I'm working on getting 100, but I'll let you guys see just how strong the Lance can actually be. So, like I said, if you're looking for a weapon, you really don't know what to start with, I highly recommend the Lance. Past that, Sword and Shield is going to be good. Longsword is going to be good. I would recommend staying away from Greatsword for now until you get your feet wet, get a few hours into the game. Same with the Charge Blade and Insect Glaive and Switch Axes. And and even the hunting horn. Things like the lance, the hammer, longsword, sword and shield, those are going to be the good ones for you. Even dual blades are going to be really good for you. So, that being said, thank you all for coming by. If you like what we're doing here on the channel, please sub to it. If you love what we're doing on this video, please leave a like and enjoy this video of me demonstrating what a lance can do. The videos coming out here soon are going to be some basic tips and tricks, and I'm going to be putting out videos of each monster and how to fight them. So, thank you all for coming by, and I will see you all in the next video.
Make sure to grab anything a monster leaves behind. On my way there!
Set a trap.
Right on target!
And there you go. Like I said, that wasn't scripted or anything. That wasn't a perfect run or anything. It's about 5 minutes. I definitely was screwing up there near the end when he enraged. I kind of did it about 4 or 5 times, but not too bad. But overall, putting in work. So I'm not even a great Lance player. I'm just a Lance player that has gotten past that early stages, and now I'm able to incorporate things like my counters into my attack. So yeah, if you want to get better at the Lance, if you want a really good easy start and a good weapon to grow with, the Lance is a good one. So for those of you who have been hating on the Lance, I was one of you. Give it a try, man. So yeah, like I said, I'll do it for today. I'll see you guys later.